Hopefully everyone can hear me as well. There is a text chat box. If you sort of can't, if it's not very clear, then it'd be good if you could just let me know in there. Everything should be working though. Okay, so we're just after 11 now, so I'm going to make a start on the webinar. Okay, so as you know, the webinar today is on the MapEagle GIS report writer. It's sort of within the context of automated contaminated land screening, and it is an introduction. For the webinar today, we've decided to invite potential clients as well as our existing users. This is sort of, I've been doing some client liaison calls recently. We know that we have some very good MapEagle users. I know some people aren't sort of utilizing it, you know, due to sort of time, and maybe they need a bit of a refresher. So we're going to be having a sort of series of webinars. This is the introduction to it, and yeah, we'll look forward to seeing you in the later ones. I'll give you a bit more information on that at the end. But for our sort of potential clients, this is a very good sort of start. You get to see it in action, and you can sort of see the context it's used in as well. Okay, quick background on myself as well. I'm a junior environmental consultant. I come from a geography background. I've been in the team since November. Okay. Okay, just to, this slideshow will be very brief to start. There might be some information here you already know about the company for our existing users, and even some of our potential clients that probably have a good sort of knowledge of what we do. But I'll just sort of whiz through this bit before showing you the software. So we just got a little quote here: good decisions see the right information at the right time. Obviously in this context, that's very applicable. Okay, again a little refresher. GIS report writer allows you to, basically it queries your GIS layers. You can query your GeoEnviron database if you're using that. If you're a potential user, that's something, you know, we'd look at, and again in future webinars we're going to look at how we can utilize the two together. Create a customizable desktop report. That's, in this context, I'm going to be sort of showcasing it for screening planning applications for contaminated land issues. I know a lot of our users are sort of using it to respond to environmental inquiry requests. But yeah, so they're the two sort of main uses at the moment. Finally, it allows you to streamline and consolidate your workflow. Okay, just briefly, the themes covered in this webinar. Who are we? How can we work with you? Even for our existing customers, you know, there's we always like to emphasize that we're always here for customer support. You know, there's training, you know, basic things via webinars. You know, we can always come up and see you as well and do in-house training. We're very sort of keen to get out and meet our clients whenever possible. We have user group meetings as well. So, you know, there's a good network of support. And that sort of applies for potential clients as well, just so you sort of know what you're getting alongside the software. Obviously, what is the report writer, and why should you be using it? And finally, sort of an introduction and demonstration of actually using the software, which obviously is it's a sort of key point. Who are we? Very briefly, a small independent company. We work mainly with local authorities. We offer software solutions, so the GeoEnviron database, which I mentioned earlier, and also our MapEagle GIS report writer. We work with flooding teams. We also do a lot of contaminated work, and we also work with environmental permitting. So there's a whole sort of range of environmental health modules that we offer for GeoEnviron. But today we're just focusing on the GIS report writer. This is just a brief overview of the services on offer. Our clients, so we've got quite a wide scope at the moment. We've got a map in there, as we, you know, we like maps at our end, and you know, it's a good way of demonstrating who's using our software. So working with over 80 local authorities. the majority of which are using it for contaminated land and MapEagle. Okay. There's also sort of work abroad. So the software was developed in Denmark actually, and it's very popular there, and it's also being sort of used internationally, as you can see at the bottom: USA, Spain, Lithuania. Okay, so on to the actual report writer itself. Instead of sort of going through slides, I feel the best way to demonstrate is to show you, and obviously for our existing users, it's good to have a little refresher. I know some of you are very sort of advanced users, but sometimes it's good, you know, it might inspire you. If you're not using it for screening planning applications, then you may sort of see how simple it is to set up for that, and you might want to move on to that. And even just, you know, if you've had your project set up for a while and you need a refresher on how to amend things, etc., this is going to be a very brief introduction on sort of how to do that. And like I said, we'll be having future webinars which will go into a lot more detail. I'll just pull up the GIS now. Okay, so I am demonstrating this in ArcView today. I think there might be some MapInfo users. I think the majority were ArcView, but basically the application is the same. We use a MapInfo extension for that. If you are interested in seeing it in that, feel free to get in touch with me after. I will be following up on this webinar. But as our current users know as well, like the principles are very much the same. The settings are the same. It's just the GIS interface which is different. Okay, so as I mentioned, this is for the sort of context I wanted to show this in today is for screening planning applications. So what I've done, I've kept it very simple, sort of started from scratch, very basic template, got some sort of basic constraints which you might be looking for. So I've got sort of my layers on the left-hand side. I'm just sticking with contaminated sites, polygons, or potentially contaminated sites, polygons, planning application polygons. I've got some EA data in there as well, sort of landfill sites, industrial sites, environmental permits, incidents, registers, and then I've sort of, this might be outside the scope of assessment at your end, but I put some ecological receptors in. I'm not sure there is actually any in this area, but it sort of demonstrates, you know, you can have as many layers as you like. We also got sort of coal mining here. There's no coal mining areas, and obviously like radon as well, which is a big one. If you're going to have to sort of look at that. And we've got an aerial photography view there as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by drawing a polygon and running the MapEagle search. Once I've done that, we'll have a look at the report that's produced. We'll have a look at the data that comes out, how it's sort of set out, and I'll go back into the GIS, back into the MapEagle settings, and sort of run through how that data sort of has been set up and how you can change it, sort of how easy it is to do that, and yeah, how you can alter it to your own taste. Okay, so what I'm going to do here, I'm going to select a polygon buffer search. So say you've got a planning application in, you've got a site address. You'll find the address on your mapping system. I'm going to use this site here as an example. So you can draw your polygon. It's quite crude as well on Street View, as you'll see when we pull up the aerial photography. But yeah, it's a sort of master map. It's not really appropriate right now. Okay, so it's found our polygon that we've just drawn. I'm going to run a buffer search. You can see the report wizard is running now. It's analyzing all our layers. And we've got a selection summary that's come up. So what this basically does is it screens the layers that you've got in your GIS and that you've set up MapEagle to look at. You've got a selection summary. So all of these layers, features have been identified. If you look at this top bit now, if you just look at my mouse, you can see a lot of them aren't present, as I mentioned earlier. There's no sort of ecological sites around here, no World Heritage sites either. and yeah, it's not a coal mining area. This is actually in London, I think. It's also worth mentioning now all this data is sort of fabricated for example purposes, so it's not shouldn't be taken too seriously. Okay, so we've got this come up now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to generate a report. Okay, and then this comes up now, the search order details. So this is the sort of admin side of it. You can enter some information in here and get it to drop into your template that you've created, which I'll talk about a little bit later once I show you the report that's produced. This can also be linked to the GeoEnviron database, which today, because I'm keeping it very simple, we've only got half an hour. I didn't want to sort of throw too much at you guys at once. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look into that later. But basically here, you can, when you've got your GeoEnviron database set up, you can pull information from that into this section. You can also do that throughout the report, but I'll also discuss that sort of later, very briefly today, and again we'll have a webinar set up on how to do that exactly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a reference in. So I'm going to put in planning application, put in a number. If you are using GeoEnviron, this will sort of automatically generate a sort of code for you there. I'm going to put in a property title. I'm not going to be very imaginative here, but keep it simple. We'll call it London House, London, Greater London, put in our office postcode. Yeah. I'll put UK. We're going to fill all the fields here just because the template's set up for them to drop in. Okay, so I'm going to hit next. And what we're going to do here is, so you can create a new document, which is a blank template. So it will just drop the information into that. But what I'm going to do is use a existing template in this case, which obviously if you're using this a lot, you know, you've got a proper document, you've got a title, you've got more information on it, and it's good for archiving as well. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use the previous template, which is the one that I've set up. Press OK. We'll start creating the summary report. This is probably a good time to mention as well to our new sort of potential users. We're looking at introducing a basic MapEagle, a free version, which will I don't know if you recall sort of the last screen before this. We sort of had a buffer search, and it came up within the GIS of what features were identified and what features weren't. So we're going to sort of instigate a free version of that. This next version, we're going to have a cheaper version, which will just sort of focus on the summary report. So you'll be able to export this summary report into a text file, into a Word document, sorry. And then obviously we've got the full version, which I know a lot of you are using. But again, that's, you know, if sort of our potential clients are sort of looking at just getting a feel for it, then yeah, it'd be a good option. And again, I'll have some more information on that following this webinar. So okay, what I'm going to do now is create a detailed report. This is a good point here. So when you're creating a maps, you can create a so you've got an option to preview. This is something I like to do, especially if you've got some aerial photography in. So for this, it's fine. This is just a site location map. You get a sort of brief idea of what the maps are going to turn out like. You can see, obviously, I've got our template set up here. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to hit continue here. You can also edit it here. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to just continue. Okay, and I thought I'd just give you a quick demonstration of how you can edit a sort of map once you've started running the report. You've basically got all these options here. You can zoom in, zoom out. You can sort of change the buffer. You can move the map around. You do have to do this within this window here, as it's sort of once the MapEagle is running, you don't really have access to sort of fiddling within ArcGIS again. And So what we'll do here, obviously depending on the size of your site with a base map, you might want a sort of more zoomed out one if it's a sort of 100-meter sort of radius site. But what I'm going to do is zoom in. And I'm only going to sort of fiddle with this map. All the rest are sort of set up as they should be. But you can see how, once you've started it, you can zoom in here. If you think that's sort of enough scope for you, you can even zoom in further. You get a good aerial representation of the site. Obviously, if it was a really big site, then you might want to be further out. But in this case, and again, this is obviously all optional. You don't have to have aerial photography at all. So what I'm going to do not show print preview again. So this map print preview screen won't come up again. It will just sort of run through the rest of the report and create our text document. So you can see the GIS is just working there, rearranging the layers. I've also, so the text file which is sort of being populated is on my other screen. So I'm just going to pull that over for you guys to have a look at. This is, again, today, there isn't actually a lot of data for this site in particular, so it's running pretty quickly. And it's worth actually mentioning that these are all web mapping layers as well. And sort of that demonstrates, it's a pretty fast process. It's obviously pulling that information from elsewhere. It's not on your hard drive. Okay, so this is just finishing up now. I think planning applications is the last layer. Or radon is, sorry. Okay, so what we've got here, the report wizard has finished creating the report. What I'm going to do, I'm going to hit OK. Just pull this document back over. And you can see within the Word document, we've got a very basic template here. You can see this address is dropped in here. You can add more information. If you're doing this for sort of environmental searches, you could put client information in. You could have a sort of introductory letter. You can add text. But in this case, we sort of said we were going to focus on the screening of planning applications. Then this is all that's sort of required today. Got the report reference, which has come up here. We've got a date. And this conclusion bit, I'll come back to that at the end. Again, this is a basic way of doing it, but you can actually get MapEagle to sort of automatically select one of these options. So say based on the amount of potentially contaminated land uses within sort of 50 meters, 100 meters, you could sort of say may be required. So you could have a sort of you could come to a conclusion just from running this MapEagle research report. Okay, so we've got a table of contents here, which is populated at the end. As you can see, obviously we haven't got a vast amount of data in here, but for this purpose, I think it serves well. So we've got our sort of title here. We've got a brief overview. And then we've got our summary data sheet. So this is the summary of what layers and sort of what information has been identified. So what we've got here, we've got our, if you look at the search distance, so these have all sort of been searched within a 250-meter buffer, which I'll show you how to change very, very briefly. The data was available, yes, and the number of features that were identified. So again, for our potential users, this is something that would be a chargeable sort of service, but we'll keep the prices down, and it won't be the full version. But you'll get the summary data sheet within a document, which will give you a good indicator of sort of what's in the vicinity. Obviously, we've got a radon reading there. We've got a site location map. You can see we've got this aerial photography that I was playing around with. So I've zoomed in. You can see it's been sort of outputted there. Okay, and then we've got our sort of basic layers. So we've got a historical and industrial waste uses. We've sort of identified an EA historic landfill here, as you can see on the map. It's also been labelled there as Blenheim Park. We've got some potentially contaminated land polygons here as well in the buffer period. We've got a selection summary. What I've done in this case is I put it into a table. So obviously some information here, identified off-site within 100 to 250 meters. This is all changeable as well, so you can, you don't have to have it identified sort of for each 50-meter buffer. You can sort of, you can just say sort of between 0 to 250, and you can list them all. But sometimes it's quite good to break them up. So we've got our sites there. We've got our EA historic landfill. So it's identified this EA site here, which is Blenheim Park. It's got a license holder here. We've got an approximate distance from site. We've got an approximate area. We've got a grid reference. Again, this is all customizable depending on what sort of attributes are stored in the layer. Again, I'll show you that very briefly. We've got environmental permits, consents, license, and incidents. Again, this might be a bit overkill for this one, as unless it's a very industrial area, these won't be too common. But I've just decided to keep the buffers the same, just so nothing was identified within 50 meters or sort of within 100 meters, but something was found within 100 to 250 meters. Again, with this one, built-in natural environment receptors. So this would have been our ecological receptors, as well as, obviously in this case, a listed buildings being found, also World Heritage sites as well. Again, same setup with the buffers here. And finally, sort of planning applications. So the idea of this really is, when you get a planning application come through, you can set up with these sort of key, the key sort of issues that would lead to a contamination recommendation being passed onto the application. So what we've got here, we've got our potentially contaminative sites. You can have a look at this. If something was next door, you might flag something up. There was a landfill here, obviously that's going to be a major issue. And what you can also do, the good idea sort of with having the planning applications at the end, is that once you've got all that data, you can sort of look on here. You can see there's been a previous application just here. So what you could do is you could go and look up that information and see sort of whether a site investigation was carried out, whether there was sort of a contaminative land use sort of condition put on that, and you can really delve into that in more information. Again, if you're using GeoEnviron, this GeoEnviron can actually be sort of mined for this information. It can drop it all in here. Again, for today, I thought we keep it simple, but again, that's something that I'm going to be looking at showing you in the future. Finally, we've got a radon. So there's no sort of radon issues here. But again, what I've done here is I've searched within the actual buffer of the site. So that's the only sort of relevant information. And that's a very basic sort of MapEagle report. It's obviously very customizable. So what I'm going to do is just show you very briefly how it was basically set up. Okay. So obviously you've got your layers down here. The first stage is to open data output style settings. You've got a couple of options here. Map base layers, which is obviously the street view that we were using. So all our other information was sort of dropped on top of that. So obviously in here you can go in, select it. You might use aerial photography for some reason. You could use master map, but obviously in this case we've selected street view. Raster-based site location maps. So actually we've put aerial photography in here, but obviously if you're using old maps, they would sort of come under this category. So you could put all your different epochs in here. And this is sort of the main point here, is the target layers and attribute data. So what we've got here, as you can see, it's listed all the layers that we've got in our GIS. We've got them all listed here. And what I've done is I've gone into each one. If you remember the table from the document, so say for potentially contaminative land uses here, I've selected ID, site name, use end state. As you can see, there's other options you can tick here, showing you could put in current use if you thought that was more relevant than others. You can put it all in if you want. We've got case officer. Obviously, that would come from your GeoEnviron as well. So that's a good example of customizing it there. Again, the same applies to the planning applications. You can choose what information is going to come out in the table in your report. Radon here. We're only interested in the sort of class of radon that's present, so I've only ticked class there. Apply. Again, very briefly, report summary options. This is basically the section at the beginning of the report here. So we've got a summary data sheet here, which has the buffer search distance. We've got info for all layers here. We've got the table properties which are set up in here, which has resulted in that there. Also, as you probably noticed in the report, then I grouped some of the layers together to sort of into categories, and you can also do this here. So what you'd want to do is you want to go into select groups. Just pull this onto my screen. You can see I've put together the site polygons, landfill uses. I've also put together industrial sites. So it's not like everything has to be separate. You can group them together if it makes more practical sense. Or for stuff like radon, you might want to sort of analyze that on its own, so you can leave it on its own. We've got all the ecological and sort of built environment receptors here, which is a good example. Got all our coalfield ones here as well. Something else you might be interested in is the sort of buffer distances. So what you can do here, we like at our end to have 50 meters, 100 meters, 250 meters. I'm sure some of you do the same, but this is changeable. You could change that to 150 to get it coming out on your maps. You could even go up to 500 if you thought that was necessary. 25 meters as well, and you can add these in here. So what you do is you'd add that in. I'm going to remove that for now. You can also select the buffers that each layer is going to search through. So for sites, I'm obviously interested in all of them, but say I went along to something like environmental pollution incidents. You might only be interested within sort of 100 meters of the site. You might think 250 is a bit of overkill in this case. So what you do is you untick that, and it would only come out in sort of, well, whichever one, 50, 100 there. That's fine. Okay, and this is where you link your sort of Word document template. Again, very briefly, I'm just going to click on this, map zoom settings, site location map. You can zoom, you can choose the buffers there that it's going to search to. So there, buffer 3 was 250 meters. So I've just set it to that. You can also add a sort of an additional amount onto that if you feel that's necessary. But again, I could change that to buffer 1, which would only be 50 meters. Again, you can do that for all of the layers. So I just hit OK there. That's very basic. Map export page settings. This is where you sort of set the width, output resolution, page setup. You can go portrait landscape, set your margins, set page breaks. Just hit OK. You can also add your sort of scale bar in here. North arrow logos, as you saw on ours. We're using information from OS, BGS as well, so we sort of like to drop them in the maps. It makes them look very professional as well, especially if you're sort of going to be charging for an environmental search rather than just using this in-house. Okay, so I think that's kind of a very brief overview of how it's sort of set up within the system. I mean, I'll show you this very quickly, the report text settings. This is where you can sort of set up how it's going to come out in the document. So you've got a table of contents, you've got a title. I mean, this takes a lot of playing around with, but again, for our sort of current users, we're going to be going into a lot more detail into the specifics of these different features and how to really customize them to your benefit. You've got custom text, you've got font settings here. And I think that's about it really for a sort of basic overview of MapEagle within the GIS. Again, like I said, if you're using MapInfo, it's sort of very similar within there. I mean, all the setups are the same. Obviously, it's just the GIS interface which is different. Okay. So what I'm going to do now, I've got a few example reports lined up, which one of our sort of major users has set up. And basically, by the end of these webinars, we'd really like your reports to look as good as these. I mean, they're very impressive. You know, when we do ours in-house as well, you know, we like to look at these as a bit of inspiration because they're very well set up. But yeah, here's an example sort of environmental search report, which I think Newark and Sherwood have charged for. This is a sort of basic screen. Here, they've got their information, so this is all from a template. We've got an invoice, which is obviously that's sort of optional, and this is their sort of document they set up. You can add custom text as well. Again, today I don't really have enough time to get into that in a lot of detail, but that'll be something we'll be looking at in the future. You've got your OS mapping. Yeah, and this is sort of a, you know, when you spend a bit of time on it and really sort of refine the layout, refine what sort of information you're getting through, and this is the sort of results that you can come out with. As you can see, it looks very smart. These are the raster maps here, as I mentioned earlier. You're getting your old maps coming out at the beginning. And then when we get down here, there's your summary data sheet. You've got geology, your target layers are all in here, deposits, hydrology. Yeah, so as you can see, this is it's a very impressive example of sort of what can be achieved. And like I said, with these webinars for our current users, we'd like everyone to feel that they can produce reports like that, and you know, if not better. So they're just really comfortable with it. Okay, I'm just going to carry on here. So we had a look at the GIS report writer. Obviously, for our current users, you know sort of what it's about. It's not really you know, this is more sort of why you should be using it, and you know, maybe be using it a bit more. It's obviously very accurate. You know, you get a document at the end of it, which you know can be sort of filed, and you know, it's a good sort of reference point for your planning application. Cost effectiveness, obviously, it's very time saving. You're not sort of manually screening sort of old maps or anything like that. The system is doing it for you. You obviously still have to interpret it to a degree. Yeah, it's a sort of consistent, accurate, very effective. And again, for potential users, you know, that's something you might be thinking about, sort of getting into your screening process. Again, with environmental search requests, it's the same principles are applied. And yeah, so basically, thank you for listening. I know it's been quite brief, and yeah, there's quite a lot to get through there. Hopefully that was a good, very basic overview of the system, what it's sort of capable of. We will be having more webinars in the future. Obviously, feel free to get in touch for specific questions, more information. And yeah, I mean, thank you very much for attending. Again, we're going to be posting some more information on the different versions coming out, the free version, the sort of basic version, and then obviously we've got the full version, which I was using today, obviously, because you know we could do everything we wanted in there. But yeah, thank you very much for attending, and yeah, we hope to see you again in the future.